If there's one thing Across the Unknown makes clear from the start, it's that this crew isn't just for show. Every character can completely change the course of your journey, whether in missions, ship management, or the consequences of your choices. So today, I'm going to rank the crew members in a top 10 list, from the most valuable, consistent, and essential for surviving the Delta Quadrant, to the most disappointing, situational, and yes, the worst of the cast. Just a heads up, I'm not just looking at charisma or nostalgia for the show here. I'm taking into account actual in-game utility, impact on missions, strategic value, and how much each character truly helps you get home in one piece. So, get your comments ready because today's discussion is going to be a long one. Let's find out who is true elite and who is just taking up space on the Voyager. So let's start at the bottom of the barrel. And look, I know this is going to hurt a bit for the Kes fans, but we need to be honest here. On paper, she seems interesting. Diplomacy, science, and medical skills are a decent package, and her telepathic attack as a combat skill sounds powerful. But in practice, within what Across the Unknown demands of you, she simply doesn't deliver enough to justify a slot on your crew. Her main problem is simple: the Doctor exists. While the Doctor covers the medical side with much more efficiency and has his own useful quirks for missions, Kes occupies a space trying to do the same thing, only in a much more limited way. Her skills are far too situational. You'll hit specific moments where telepathy shines, but those moments are rare, and the rest of the time she's just taking up a spot that could belong to someone who actually solves problems. And that telepathic attack? Pretty in theory. In practice, the cooldown and the right situation for it to work well rarely align when you need it most. While other crew members have combat skills that impact the battlefield consistently, Kes depends on a specific window to stand out, and the game doesn't give you that luxury often, especially on higher difficulties. So, it's not that Kes is a terrible character. She has charm, and fans of the series will want her for pure nostalgia, which I totally get. But when it comes to optimizing your crew and ensuring Voyager gets home without a hitch, she's the first one you look at and think, I could replace her with someone better. And almost everyone does exactly that as soon as the opportunity arises. Tier D isn't a death sentence, it's just the reality of a game that requires every crew member to pull their weight, and unfortunately, Kes falls short. All right, let's talk about Neelix. And look, I know you probably have a soft spot for the most cheerful cook in the Delta Quadrant. I do too. But that's exactly the problem with him in the game. He's the type of character you like having around, but when things get real, you start looking elsewhere and thinking, man, why did I bring Neelix on this mission? His ability to reset all hero cooldowns with rousing speech is interesting on paper, but it relies on specific synchronization to work well, and the game rarely gives you that window comfortably. Now, to be fair to him, in the early campaign, Neelix is genuinely useful. He covers diplomacy checks and even helps a bit with engineering, and assigning him to the mess hall guarantees that morale bonus per cycle that makes a real difference in the early hours. If you already know that Across the Unknown can end in mutiny if you neglect food and morale, then you understand his value. And Neelix is the right guy to hold that front at the start. He literally keeps the crew sane while you're still trying to figure out the game's systems. The problem is that the game grows in complexity and difficulty, and Neelix simply doesn't scale well. When you start going on serious exploration missions, especially in advanced sectors, he starts appearing as the weakest link. He doesn't have the resilience needed to handle high-risk missions, and dying with Neelix on the team is a much more real possibility than with other members. You start feeling like you're babysitting the guy instead of counting on him. And then comes the moment most players face, the Tuvix event. The entire internet playing this game reached the same conclusion. You make Tuvix and never look back. The community got so excited about the chance to get rid of Neelix for the good of the team that it became almost a meme. Tier C isn't a horrible sentence, but he only lives there because the early game needs morale and food management so badly that ignoring him completely would be a mistake. Once you solve that problem with other resources, Neelix hits the bench. Now entering a more interesting part of the ranking, I like Harry Kim precisely because he's that character who almost never seems incredible at first glance, but always finds a way to be useful. He isn't the flashiest name on the crew, he doesn't have that absurd skill that changes everything on its own, and perhaps that's why many people underestimate his value. In Star Trek Voyager, Across the Unknown, managing the crew and ship roles is a major part of the experience, and that's where a versatile character like Harry starts to make sense. To me, his greatest merit is being the ultimate jack of all trades. You know that crew member you put in a role because the better specialists are busy, and yet he still gets the job done? That's Harry. He doesn't dominate any one area like the top-tier cast, but he usually doesn't let you down either, and in a game like this, that's worth more than it seems when you're dealing with multiple crises at once. On the bridge, however, is where I think he really gains personality in the ranking. Tactical Scan gives him much clearer utility because he stops being just the fix-it guy and starts contributing visibly to your control of the situation. The catch is that this depends heavily on your playstyle. If you exploit space synergies and like getting value from those combinations, Harry's importance rises. If not, he just goes back to looking competent, never special. And that's exactly why Tier B- feels fair. I wouldn't put him any lower because characters like him quietly sustain campaigns in a practical and efficient way, especially when resources or slots are tight. But I also can't put him much higher because he's rarely the reason a composition becomes truly powerful. Harry Kim is the kind of choice I respect more than I love. He's not the star of the team, but he's the guy who keeps the gears turning when the protagonists are busy. Tom Paris is that character you look at and think, man, this guy was born to fly. And in the context of Across the Unknown, that's exactly what he delivers. Space encounters carry huge weight in the game, and having Tom in the cockpit makes a real difference. He's not just a competent pilot, he's genuinely great at it. And you feel that when trying to maneuver Voyager in situations where every decision matters. If your playstyle favors frequent combat and space navigation, Tom will rise in your estimation very quickly. The problem starts when you need to leave the ship. Tom Paris on the ground is a B-level character who suddenly acts more like a Tier C because the competition changes completely. You have Chakotay, who brings leadership, tribal bonuses, and exploration skills that make sense in ground missions, and Tuvok, who covers security and tactics with an efficiency Tom simply can't match. Compared to those two in the same scenario, he clearly loses utility, and in a game that heavily mixes space combat with missions on planets and stations, that's a real limitation. What makes me respect Tier B for him is specifically this specialization. In a crew ranking, being the best pilot on the list is no small feat. It's a role only he truly fills at the level the game demands. When a space encounter is high risk, you'll want Tom in that pilot seat without a second thought. He isn't as versatile as Harry Kim, but unlike Harry, when he shines consistently and in a much more obvious way. A B grade is honest for what he represents, an excellent specialist trapped in a game that sometimes requires its best members to do more than one thing well. If Across the Unknown were basically all space combat, Tom Paris would rightfully be much higher on this list. But the Delta Quadrant has planets, civilizations, and situations that ask for much more than a good pilot, and that's where his limitation shows. Still, he'll never be a burden to your team, and that says a lot about who he is in the cast. Janeway is a unique case in this ranking because she is, without a doubt, the most iconic character in the series, and the game respects that by placing her as the moral and command anchor for the entire ship. With Command 110, she has the highest command attribute of the entire crew, and the morale bonus she passively distributes to the ship is something you feel over the long haul of the campaign. You know that kind of character who, even without doing anything spectacular at a given moment, makes everything feel more fragile in her absence? That's Janeway. The problem that lands her here in 6th place instead of higher is a single heavy factor. She doesn't go to the field, and in a game where you're constantly sending crew members on ground missions, shipboardings, and high-risk situations, a character who stays on the bridge the whole time has a very defined impact ceiling. You don't click on her the same way you click on Tuvok or 7 of 9, because the satisfaction of using a character actively in a critical situation simply doesn't exist with her in the same way. What catches my attention is how the game uses her intelligently within these limits. She appears in important narrative decisions and ship-wide crises, and that Command 110 means when you need to resolve something based on pure authority, there's no one better. She isn't passive background support. She is the structural pillar of your campaign, and ignoring what she represents in the morale system is a mistake less experienced players make and pay for dearly later. Tier B+ is an honest spot for her because the ranking is about practical impact, and Janeway has a huge impact, just in a different way than the others. She's not the most exciting play of your turn, but she's the foundation that allows those exciting plays to exist. Think of it like this. If the members above her are the stars who win games, Janeway is the coach who makes the whole team function well enough to reach the finals. You wouldn't trade her for anyone, but you understand perfectly why she doesn't top this list. Tuvok is the kind of character you appreciate more over time than the first time you use him. In the beginning, he seems like just a competent security member. Serious, efficient, no frills. But as the campaign progresses and situations get more complex, you start to realize he's solving problems you didn't even know you had. Internal ship management in Across the Unknown isn't cosmetic. Saboteurs, crew tensions, and internal threats are real crises that arise and can destabilize everything you've built. And Tuvok is the only one who handles this truly consistently. What separates him from the characters below him in this ranking is the combination of tactical utility in the field and internal utility on the ship. He isn't a niche specialist like Tom Paris, who shines in one context and disappears in others. Tuvok works on high-risk ground missions, works in direct conflict situations, and still comes back to the ship to maintain order while you're busy managing other crises. This versatility, combined with the depth of the security role in the game, makes him one of the most complete members of the cast. His tactical attribute also deserves a separate mention, because it's not just a high number on a sheet, it changes how you approach certain missions. With Tuvok in the group, you have options that simply don't exist without him, especially in situations requiring stealth, threat detection, or conflict containment before it escalates. This is the kind of thing that makes you reorganize your standard lineup once you learn how the game really works, because once you experience it, it's hard to justify leaving him out. 5th place is fair, but honestly, he flirts with the top 4 depending on your playstyle. If your campaign is full of internal tension, infiltration missions, and complex tactical situations, Tuvok could easily seem better than those above him. The Vulcan logic that defines him as a character translates perfectly into the game. No emotion, no ego, no waste. Just efficiency. And sometimes consistent efficiency is worth more than a spectacular skill that only works half the time. 7 of 9 is that character who, once you finally unlock her and understand what she's capable of, completely changes how you think about your crew composition. She doesn't have a single specialty like Tuvok or Tom Paris. She has several, and all at the highest possible level. Her bonuses in science and engineering aren't incremental. They are absurdly high, meaning she fits into almost any situation and resolves it. It's no exaggeration to say 7 is the smartest character in the game, in the most literal sense. She processes problems in a way no other crew member can replicate with such consistency. What defines her as a luxury wildcard is exactly this ability to fill gaps without sacrificing quality. When you're building your team and realize you're weak in engineering, you put in 7. When you need a tough science check on a critical mission, you put in 7. When you just want to be sure your composition doesn't have a hole exploited by the game during a crisis, 7 solves it. She is the kind of member who elevates any group she's in, and that is a rare and extremely valuable quality in a game with so many variables. Her Borg mentality is present in every game system in a way that goes beyond the numbers on the sheet. She is efficient in a way characters like Neelix never will be. No dependence on specific context, no need for elaborate setups, no narrow window of opportunity to shine. You send her on a mission and you know she will deliver. This high-level predictability is something you learn to value deeply after hours of campaign play, dealing with characters who depend on specific conditions to work well. 4th place might seem low to many who play with her as the absolute protagonist of the crew, and I understand that feeling. The gap between her and the top 3 characters is much smaller than the gap between her and those below. If this were a ranking of pure polyvalence and consistency, 7 would probably be number 1 without question. But Across the Unknown has specific mechanics where the 3 above her deliver something that she, despite being extraordinary, cannot replicate with the same depth. Still, if you could only pick one character to carry your entire campaign, 7 would be one of the most defensible choices on this entire list. The Doctor is one of the most satisfying character progressions that Across the Unknown offers, and it's no coincidence he reaches the top 3. From the start of the campaign, he is already irreplaceable in the medical role, and when I say irreplaceable, I mean it literally. Health crises, mission casualties, crewmen at their physical limit after tough encounters, all of this goes through the Doctor's hands, and the difference between having him and not having him is brutal. Anyone who has tried running a long campaign without prioritizing the EMH knows exactly what I'm talking about, because you start losing valuable members in situations that would be completely manageable with him present. The real turning point, however, is the mobile holographic emitter. This is one of those moments in the game where you feel narrative progression transforming into true mechanical progression. Suddenly, the Doctor stops being that presence confined to sickbay and becomes an active agent in the field. And it's not a timid transition. He hits science missions like a beast. The bonuses he brings, combined with the ability to act outside the ship, create a completely different character than the one you had in the early hours. And that evolution is genuinely exciting to experience. What impresses me about his character design within the game is that he maintains both identities simultaneously after getting the emitter. He is still the best Doctor on the crew. That doesn't change, doesn't diminish, and isn't replaced by the new function. He simply adds a whole layer of utility on top of what was already excellent. It's different from characters who swap one strength for another as they progress. The Doctor accumulates, and accumulating in a limited crew composition is a huge advantage you can't ignore. 3rd place is a position he occupies with all the dignity an AI with an inflated ego can have. And if you've played enough to understand the character's humor within the game, you know he'd say he deserved 1st. But, jokes aside, the difference between him and the top 2 is small and very specific. He only loses because the 2 ahead have mechanics that are even more impactful in the most decisive moments. The Doctor, however, is the choice that never leaves you with regrets. From the first mission to the final credits, he justifies every slot he occupies with a consistency few characters on this list can match. B'Elanna Torres is the kind of character you learn to love not for her explosive personality, though that helps, but for how she solves the most frequent and painful problems Across the Unknown throws in your face. Engineering is the most tested skill in crisis events in the game, and that's no accident. Voyager is constantly taking damage, overloading systems, and facing failures at critical moments, and every one of those situations goes through B'Elanna's console. She isn't the most clicked character in the game by accident. She is because the game literally never stops asking for her. What separates her from being just a niche specialist is the depth of her engineering attribute compared to any other other crew member. Even 7 of 9, who is excellent in engineering, doesn't reach the level B'Elanna delivers consistently. When you're in a reactor crisis, a shield failure, or a situation where every attribute point matters, the difference between having her and not having her is the difference between solving the problem on the first try or watching the situation escalate into something much worse. This creates a natural dependency. You start to unable to imagine your lineup without her. The Klingon variant, however, is where the game transforms an already excellent character into something absolutely absurd. The overcharge bonus on weapons completely changes her profile in space combat, adding an offensive layer no one would expect from an engineer. Suddenly, she's not just the person keeping the ship running, she's also the reason enemies are taking more damage than they can handle. This combination of defensive sustain with offensive pressure in a single character is something very few crew members can do, and none do it with the same brutal elegance as the Klingon variant. Second place is an honest position, only because first place exists, and even then, it's a legitimate debate depending on your playstyle. If you prioritize ship survival, crisis management, and consistent space combat, B'Elanna may very well be your number 1 in practice, even if the official ranking says otherwise. She is unbeatable in a very specific and real way. You can build compositions without 7, you can adapt without Tuvok, you can even survive without the Doctor at times, but trying to carry a full campaign without B'Elanna is a challenge most players don't want and don't need to face. And we've reached the top. Chakotay. If you went through this whole list wondering which character the game was on some level built around for field missions, the answer is here. The highest attack stats of the entire crew would already be enough to put him on a different level. But what truly defines his Tier S+ status is the context that no other character can fill. Janeway never goes on away missions. Never. And that means every time Voyager needs leadership on the ground, Chakotay is not just the best option, he is the option. The captain on the ground by necessity and by merit at the same time. His weight in ground combat is something you feel immediately and consistently throughout the entire campaign. There is no difficult ground encounter where you look at Chakotay and think, he's not making a difference, because he always is, and in an obvious way. His attack numbers turn confrontations that would be grueling into manageable situations, and manageable confrontations into clean victories. Added to the rate of fire bonus on the bridge, he still impacts space combat from a support role, meaning even when he's not in the field, his presence on the ship has real and measurable value. His leadership in diplomacy and security checks closes the argument definitively, because it's not enough to be the best in combat. In a game with the depth of Across the Unknown, you need members who solve problems of completely different natures, and Chakotay does that. He enters a tense negotiation with an alien civilization with the same authority he enters an armed confrontation. This range is what separates a Tier A character from Tier S+. It's not just being the best at something, it's being excellent at several things that matter at the same time. Chakotay's first place is one of those rankings that makes more sense the more you play. At first, you might question it. Maybe 7 seems more versatile, maybe the Doctor seems more indispensable at times. But after hours of the campaign, after tough ground missions, after critical negotiations, and situations where leadership makes all the difference, you look back and realize Chakotay was in every single one of the most important plays you made. He may not be the flashiest character in the show, but in Across the Unknown, he is, without discussion, the most valuable member Voyager has. Tier S+, deserved from start to finish.